Metal Gear Solid 2's big boss run was a difficult experience. Having to beat the whole game on extreme with a bunch of different requirements such as doing it under 3 hours, with less than 700 shots fired and all the other requirements was certainly an arduous task that took hours of persistence and grit to achieve. Finally reaching that end screen and seeing the result was an experience like no other.
Yes! Yeah! Yes!
Though I had finished the run and earned the rank, as well as the platinum that came with it on the PS5, there was something even more sinister lurking in the shadows. Another Metal Gear challenge of infamous, unspeakable difficulty that dwelled in the abyss. As I stood there on my victory podium, reveling in my hard-earned big boss rank, I stared into that abyss, and the Metal Gear Solid 2 VR missions stared back. Metal Gear Solid 1 featured around 300 VR missions. These force you to engage with basically every mechanic the game has to offer, and some of them were reasonably difficult. I did do the entire thing in one day, and though they definitely got a lot more challenging as they went on, I didn't think they were too bad. I could not say the same about the Metal Gear Solid 2 VR missions. Metal Gear Solid 2 does not feature 300 VR missions. It has over 500. These are split across 6 characters. Well, really just 2, but with a few different looks each. There's Raiden dressed as Grey Fox, Naked Raiden, Solid Snake, Pliskin, Snake in a Tuxedo, and finally MGS1 Snake. Each character more or less follows a consistent structure for their missions. Let me explain what each one consists of. There's Sneaking Mode, where you have to make it to the exit without being seen through a series of stages with increasing complexity. Basically, get to the end, if you get seen, you have to retry. After that, there's Sneaking Elimination Mode, which has you going through the same stages but with an additional need to kill every guard without being seen. So just get to the end but also kill everyone. Weapon Mode, where you have to use the designated weapon to shoot targets, with every weapon in the game having about 5 levels. There's the handgun, assault rifle, sniper rifle, C4/claymores, grenades, stinger, Nikita, and unarmed. Raiden gets the bonus weapon mode here since he has a sword. Variety Mode, consisting of missions with more unique setups like obstacle courses, sniper defense, or having to avoid kaiju-sized guards. Bomb Disposal Mode is pretty self-explanatory. You have to go around with the coolant spraying bombs just like you did in the story. Elimination Mode, which is basically a sandbox where you get loose in a room of the game with limited equipment and have to take out all the guards. These were my favourite. Finally, there's Hold Up Mode, which is similar to Elimination Mode, but all you gotta do to take out guards is hold them up. When you do that, they're gone. This one... ooh, I'll have things to say about this one later. The way it works is at the start you only have Raiden and Snake, and completing their missions increases the percentage. When you reach 50% on either of them, you'll unlock the second version of that character. So getting to 50% on Raiden unlocks the Grey Fox outfit, getting to 50% on Snake unlocks Pliskin. By reaching 100% on all of these characters, you unlock the third version, and then after all that, you unlock MGS1 Snake. The way these characters are organised on the menu mostly corresponds with the increasing difficulty. Raiden can be considered VR's easy mode, while Snake's missions are more on the normal to hard end. MGS1 Snake exists on another plane of existence altogether, but we'll get there. Honestly, I'm not gonna sit here and go through every single character mission because that would take me ages, and most of it is just doing the same stages over and over again but getting harder. What I'll do here is just a general overview of how each chunk of missions went, and highlight things I think worth mentioning. MGS1 Snake gets his own more in-depth section later because there's more to talk about there. Each mission has a scoring system that awards you points depending on how fast you beat it, as well as bonus points for things such as doing it with no kills, alerts, and how much ammo you have left. There's a top 3 podium of each, with the first place being in this nice orange shade. But I didn't have to get a first place rank in all of these. There is a trophy for getting first place in 50 of them, but with over 500 missions here, that just meant I could do all the really easy ones and get that with no problem. If the platinum for this game had required you to get first place in every single one of them, this would be so much harder. Basically, since I didn't have to worry about getting the top rank every time, I could be as slow or as clumsy as I wanted if the mission allowed it. And I certainly took advantage of that. The sneaking missions were pretty straightforward. especially the earlier ones since you have the tranquilizer gun and radar available. Like I said, I didn't have to worry about ranks here, so if there was a mission I couldn't effortlessly ghost through, I could just go around breaking everyone's necks or sniping people across the room with a handgun. As long as I made it to the end without being seen, that was it. These did have timers though, so I couldn't take too long. Weapon mode was fun, mostly. The handgun and assault rifle missions require shooting targets by mixing first person aiming with the auto aim, and not gonna lie, I felt cool getting high scores on these. I expected to hate the sniper missions because it's MGS2, and as established in my big boss video, I don't particularly care for the sniping. But you know what, they were fine, and I found it satisfying to one-shot each target in the right spot. I felt like Wesley in Wanted or something. The movie, not the comic. The C4/Claymore ones were just sort of there, usually requiring you to place your explosive somewhere on the path these blocks follow to start a chain reaction and get as many as possible. Sometimes the best way to do this was just to blow myself up next to the boxes. The grenade missions honestly gave me the most trouble out of these. In these missions, you have the option of using either thrown hand grenades or the grenade launcher. Here's what it looks like when you aim a handgun. See that little red dot? That shows you where your shot's gonna go. Assault rifles have these too. Here's what it looks like when you aim a sniper rifle. That crosshairs there in your scope shows you where your shot's gonna go. Here's what it looks like when you aim the grenade launcher. Do you see a dot anywhere? No, I don't. With no reticle or sight, you kind of just have to use the location of your gun on the screen as a reference point of where to aim, and then just kind of use trial and error until you get the grenade to go where you want it to go. This is something that really, it's hard to explain how to do it. You just kind of need to look and think, okay, my gun is there, my grenade's hopefully gonna go over there. You kind of just do this trial and error until you sort of get it, and I say sort of get it because I sure as hell didn't. I bumbled my way through these. The early missions are fine because you're just hitting stationary targets, but when they start moving around, it becomes trickier. When they start moving around and disappearing, it gets even worse, especially when you're at a distance. Pliskin's Grenade Mission 5 became a thorn in my side because I really struggled to hit these moving boxes that kept popping in and out of existence. They did have a route I could learn, but just trying to make my grenades actually go to the right spots in time was horrible. The Stinger missions were nice because there's something really satisfying about locking on and watching them go boom. The Nikita missions were my favourite, I think. They started off simple, just hitting nearby targets, but then they became way more elaborate, where you had to go around these mazes and big obstacle courses, going up and down ramps and going around corners. It was awesome. The final stage requires you to get through quite a tricky course, but I'm going to save that for later when I talk about MGS1 Snake. The sword missions were exclusive to Raiden, and you gotta cut these little bamboo, plastic, blue stick things. Some of these are angled in different ways, and you need to basically cut in different directions from your sword to hit them properly. None of this was difficult. No weapon mode was basically the sword one, but you just use your unarmed melee attacks instead. In this one, hitting a stick sends it spinning away, and the trick is to knock it into the other sticks to build up a big combo. Raiden and Snake have a first person mode as well. I don't like it. At all. I think Metal Gear Solid games actually control well, or is that just because I'm used to it by now? But applying those same controls to a first person perspective just doesn't work very well. I think in the regular game when you're in the third person, having square to shoot works because you can stop, aim, hold R1 and then shoot. But having it in first person feels so bloody awkward. I just don't get how you're meant to move these with your fingers. You're put in these mazes with guards and tasked with killing them, and also you don't have a radar. You can't back up against walls or lean around either, so you literally need to just kind of walk around a wall and kind of hope the guard doesn't see you. Getting into firefights isn't advised because they will call for backup if you're spotted, and that is just extra guards to take on. These don't contribute to the count either, that's just extra guys to fight. I did not enjoy these at all. I do applaud the developers for trying something different, I really do, but the variety and occasional photography mission made things more interesting. The photography missions basically boiled down to taking photos of things based on the hints you're given, such as close-ups of certain models on the posters to find in the level. I failed at these quite a few times and the hints changed every time. Eventually the hints became really ridiculous, with vague hints such as which model the developers like. How the hell am I supposed to know that? As for the variety missions, there are a few standout ones. One has you using the hanging mechanic to continuously drop down or grab onto ledges until you reach the goal, which took me a few tries because the timing is strict. I didn't use this in the main game that much, so this was a bit of an eye-opener for me. I kinda just mashed triangle as I fell and hoped for the best. There's another one where you gotta protect someone with a sniper rifle as guards swarm them, and this is one of those missions that really gets ramped up later. There's another variety mission called Zako Survival, which pits you against 3 waves of enemies which get harder each time. You must remain on your side of the room, while the enemies have the other side and can also come over to yours just because they can. This is Metal Gear Solid 2's version of the classic wave mode you see in many other games, and when the waves are done, there's a boss fight against a big monster. Just look at that. Bomb disposal mode was a problem because when my PS3 was plugged into my monitor for recording, I did not have any audio for some reason. I tried different things, I tried changing the settings, but I could not get any sound through my games. I had to play these games in silence. The real problem here is that some of these bombs are proximity ones that blow up when you get close to them, and the only way of knowing that they're close is the fact that they beep. This is a problem because I couldn't hear the game. I had to resort to a guide for these because I had no way of doing it. I do have headphones on my computer, but my USB ports are a bit fiddly sometimes if too many things are plugged in, and I didn't want to risk it. I just used guides for these. X Raiden gets his own set of missions. He's called X Raiden because he's naked. Want to know what these missions are called? Streaking mode. Amazing. This is similar to MGS1's final VR mission, where you gotta get through a bunch of rooms on a timer, but with checkpoints in every new room. This was very trial and error, and the final room had some very arse-clenching timings. So for the other characters, honestly, none of these were that bad. Some of them required more retries than others, but none of them were too bad. Now let's talk about MGS1 Snake. MGS1 Snake was where hopes and dreams went to die. This was, without a doubt, the hardest thing I've ever had to do in this franchise. The things these missions ask me to do push me to places I'd never been before in gaming. This is the make it or break it part of the VR missions. This is such a step up. I wanted to get the variety missions out of the way first because I'm of the mentality that when going for a reward like a platinum or something like that, I would rather get the hardest challenges out of the way first. I assumed these would be the absolute nadir of MGS2's VR missions, and getting past these would mean smooth sailing later on. MGS1 Snake only has 3 variety missions, thankfully. All 3 of them are just harder versions of missions you've already done before, and oh yes, they are harder. Variety Mission 1 has you doing the protector thing with the sniper rifle. The thing I need to protect here is the most important aspect of Snake's life. The centre of his universe, who he would go to hell and back to defend. The cardboard box. It's the same gist as the other ones. Down some pentazemin, settle my bum down and start blasting. Oh, that's a lot of guys. Yeah, this one was messy. Protecting that box against all of these guys looks like a daunting task, and it is. There are 31 guys who all want a nice piece of that hot box, and each and every one of them has the health pool of fucking Yazmat from Final Fantasy XII. You better make sure that you drop these guys with like 60 bullets on the spot, because if you don't, these assholes inject themselves with the Wonder Juice and just carry on trucking. I will say that I didn't think this was as bullshitty as I thought it seemed at first. These guys all follow a set route, and through my many attempts I started to notice where they would be in relation to the time on the clock. They are not random. In between taking pot shots at anyone I could, I had to keep an eye on the box at certain timestamps because I knew there would be guys around there. There are claymores scattered around the area which you can use to blow up guys if you really want to, but honestly I didn't bother. You can only see them with the thermal, and the time I could have spent in looking at one and waiting for a good moment to shoot it was time I could have just spent taking guys out. I'm glad they were there if I needed them, but I didn't need them. My winning strategy in the end was just to shoot a bunch of guys in the top left as they spawned, and then try to keep an overwatch of the area after that. At certain times on the clock, it seemed like a bunch of guys were congregating near the box, and then start approaching one by one in sequence. I actually found this to be the most consistent way of taking out large groups of them at once, assuming I was consistent and quick with my shots. Taking them out when they're on the way there definitely helped, but also being able to take these groups of guys out here was winning strategy for me. There were some really close calls here where a guy would just come and stand right next to it about an inch away and I'd pop him right there. Took me a fair few attempts to do, but I managed to do this in under an hour. Fuck the laugh. I did it! I fucking did it! Oh, I did it! Oh! Oh! Fuck you know! The second variety mission was eliminating a bunch of enemies in the dark. I'd already done this a few times with other characters, so I knew what to expect here. Oh, look, a nice little vent in the floor I can go through. Oh, what's that? MVG night vision goggles, some of that sun. A lot of creeping around in the dark and looking for the little red lights of the guards' helmets. Took me a few tries to establish my route, but when I did it, I got it. Oh, that was some fucking masterful matrix shit there. I shot him a bunch of times. I kicked him. I ran behind him, laid on the floor, fucking sniped him when he got up. That's some Neo. Variety Mission 3 was the final Zacho survival. It was more or less the same as the previous Zacho survivals, but obviously a lot harder. The final wave had so many enemies, including a lot more Tengus. I was expecting to spend an hour on this. I managed to do this on my first try. Again, I didn't have a guide here, I just did it. I had less rations, less ammo, and faced deadlier enemies, but yet, I somehow did this faster. I remember the coolant trick to use on the Tengus from the big boss run, so I just kind of stood in a corner and took those out. But whenever a grenade came my way, I shat myself a bit, because it meant I had to leave my cover. I came really close to dying here, but I did it my first try. I did look up how to beat the boss though, because I really didn't want to cock it up and have to redo all the waves again. I really didn't. So I'll hold my hands up, I used the guide for the boss. Oh, on my first try! On my first try! On my first try!
Snake.
Ah! You know, if I hadn't known about that thing for shooting the UFO, you know, that might have been a lot harder, but... Oh, top score as well. Top score! Oh! That was the variety missions done. The sneaking mode required some finesse because of the cramped areas and amount of guards. Some of the timings required for getting through certain parts were very precise, and lots of retries were had here. Like I said earlier, I wasn't actively going for the top scores, so the no kill bonus was of no concern to me, and I was merciless in all the neck breaking I did. I felt much more comfortable knowing that the guard was out of the way and wouldn't turn around on me. Weapon mode, honestly, was quite easy, and not really too much of a step up in difficulty from the other characters. I do suppose you have less supplies and time, but none of these gave me any trouble. I was expecting the grenade missions to be a lot harder. Since you don't have the grenade launcher anymore, I need to manually throw grenades instead. Mission 5 sprang to mind because I had such an awful time with it before with Pliskin. When it came to MGS1 Snake, I beat this on my second attempt. I just kept throwing grenades in the general direction of where the boxes were and I won. It made me think that if I just used regular grenades when doing this as Pliskin, would it have been a lot easier? Maybe. The final Nikita mission was the same maze I'd been through before, but now with a lot more obstacles. I thought this would be really hard and I'd never do it, because you need some precise movements here. But I discovered a way of sort of cheating this. I call this the Sean method. Basically, if you hit one of these red boxes that acts as the obstacles, you get a points deduction and your rocket blows up. However, this also removes the obstacle from the mission, and you don't have to worry about it the next time you try, as long as you're on the same attempt of course. When you do a retry then all the things reset. My super cheap, easy winning method was just to intentionally fly my rocket into the later obstacles to get rid of them, because when enough of them were gone, I'd have a much nicer, easy path to the goal. Did this completely tank my score? Absolutely. Did I give a shit? Absolutely not. Elimination mode I actually really enjoyed doing. Because this is MGS1 Snake, these were of course harder than before, and in case I didn't mention it before, I might not if I forgot. Every mission with Snake doesn't have a radar. You also have way less ammo, and the guards are set to extreme difficulty I think. Each stage was a puzzle that needed to be solved. The most iffy one was the Strut F mission with the high-tech soldiers, since you can't grab them, but thankfully they're all still vulnerable to the old punch in the bum trick. No one would have believed in the first years of the 21st century that VR missions so horrible were being developed by Konami. No one could have dreamed we would have to go through some of the most agonizing bullshit, as rats might go through a maze for study. Few players even considered the possibility that there could be VR missions so horrible that even pushing a single button was an issue. And yet, at Konami HQ, talented developers with intentions far crueler than my own regarded players with malicious eyes. And slowly and surely, they sent their hold-up missions against us. Remember earlier when I said that it would be smooth sailing after the variety missions? Well, it wasn't smooth sailing. It was very unsmooth sailing. It was the sort of unsmooth sailing that Gordon Lightfoot could make a catchy song about. Let's talk about the hold-up missions. I've avoided speaking about the hold-up missions for other characters up until now because there's quite a bit to unpack here. Earlier on I mentioned that the hold-up missions are basically just the elimination missions, but you get rid of the guards by holding them up by sneaking up on them and pointing a gun at them, rather than killing them. This is something you gotta do in the main game to get dog tags, and it can be done with either handguns or automatic weapons. You can't get any alerts doing these missions, and being spotted results in a game over. Sounds simple, right? Let's talk about the controls. As we know, Metal Gear Solid 2 was originally released on the PS2. What you may or may not know was that the PS2 featured pressure-sensitive buttons that had different effects in games depending on how hard you pushed the button, such as driving games altering the acceleration based on how hard you pushed X. Metal Gear Solid 2 uses the square button to aim and fire your gun, and the way this works is you gotta lightly hold down square to raise your gun, and then push it in even harder to fire. When it comes to handguns, they don't actually fire until you let go of the square button, so you can push it in as hard as you want, as long as you don't take your finger off square. If you have a shot ready but want to cancel it, you need to gently ease your thumb off square to lower it, or you can just use R2 to instantly unequip your gun, which also lowers it of course. If you're not very good at using the pressure sensitivity properly, you can use this as an easy alternative, and I used it a lot. It's important that I explain this properly because it's integral to this section. Aiming the assault rifle is a bit different and requires more from you. You have to lightly push square in enough to raise and aim the assault rifle, and then if you want to actually shoot the gun, you gotta pull the button in even further. To lower your gun, or stop shooting, you have to ease off the button. This differs from the handgun in that it relies on a far more careful consideration of the pressure you need to apply to the button. If you push it too lightly, nothing happens. If you push it too hard, you just spray everywhere. Remember, you could get away with easily aiming the handguns by just holding down square as hard as you want and then unequipping it when you want to put the gun away, but you can't do this with the assault rifles. Aiming the assault rifle without firing it takes a deceptively intricate level of physical engagement from the player, somewhere on the same spectrum as the amount of button mashing you need to do in other parts of the game. I need to mention that this was the last version of the game to feature this mechanic, as the Xbox 360 version of the game, as well as the Master Collection version, were released on platforms that no longer featured pressure-sensitive buttons. If your first experience with MGS2 was on one of these other platforms, then you may be blissfully unaware of this, aiming and lowering a gun by just clicking in the left stick. Now that I've spent time explaining how the aiming works, let's get back to the hold-up missions. Since you can just use a handgun for them, which we've established is easy to do, these are just a case of working out the right route through each level, identifying which enemies to hold up in what order and the timings for each. Of course, these gradually grew in difficulty over time, that was to be expected. MGS1 Snake's hold-up missions were not like the others. MGS1 Snake's hold-up missions make you use the M4 assault rifle. Cast your mind back a short while to when I explained how the aiming guns works with the pressure-sensitive buttons. Remember how I explained how you have to push the square button by a very specific amount in order to raise the gun without firing? Now, not only do you have to learn the layout of each mission and the most effective way of dealing with the guards, but you have to do so while making absolutely dead sure that you do every hold up with the exact precise pinpoint amount of pressure on your square button. If I got up behind a guy and pushed square just a little bit too much, I'd fire my gun and cause an alert and have to redo the entire thing.
Freeze.
This, my friends, was awful. It was awful. Now, maybe it's just me. Maybe I just suck. I won't doubt for a second that there are players out there who didn't struggle with these controls and were able to consistently do this without any issues. If you're one of those who had no struggles, then awesome. Let me know in the comments. For me though, it was rough. I struggled so much on this that I had to resort to drastic measures. I taped down my square button slightly, so that there was already a little bit of pressure on it, but not enough to actually raise the gun. With this, all I had to do was tap square very lightly, and that would apply just enough pressure to do what I needed it to do. It didn't work flawlessly, and I still had to be careful with how much I tapped it. But I was able to do this more consistently. I can't think of a single other time in any game where I had to resort to methods like this. It was absurd. I would consider this one handful of missions more frustrating than any section of the big boss run. Halfway through these, I needed a break. These missions were getting to me a bit, so I had to get away and come back fresh. I went for a nice walk, I watched some of my favourite films to get myself psyched up. I cooked a lovely roast dinner. When I did come back for the rest of these, I was ready. Not every single hold-up mission was bad as the others. In a few of them, I was able to find a nice, quiet corner of the stage away from all the guards and empty my gun into the wall, so I could run around with a nice, empty gun pushing square as hard as I wanted. This was a blessing, and I'm so thankful there were levels that allowed this. In Mission 7, the game saw fit to bestow me an M9 tranquilizer gun, which felt like the equivalent of Kojima himself knocking on my door and delivering me a lovely mint and garlic doner kebab with a rum and coke to accompany it. The mission that gave me the most trouble was Mission 4 in Strut B. There were these two guards on the right of the room that I always left for last, and they're in such an awkward position because they walk towards each other on their patrol, and nearby areas you could use to hide in are full of either noisy flooring or grated metal that they can fucking see through. This one was the worst. This was the one that made me need a break. If it wasn't for the controls, these wouldn't have been so bad. I feared the PS3 controller's pressure sensitivity was a lot more fiddly than the PS2's, so maybe these missions were all fine and dandy back in the day. After hours of awfulness, I was done. I was well and truly past the worst of it. I wasn't quite done yet though, because I still had bomb disposal missions to do. Bomb disposal mode was a tricky little blighter because, as I established earlier, I had no sound. I had to use a guide for all of these. There were guards walking around with bombs on their bums, and these were downright evil. I had to follow these pricks around and wait for the exact moment to get rid of them while out of sight, which made the final mission on Big Shell a bit ass-clenchy, because there's bombs in pretty much every room in a sequence. But each room was a checkpoint, so if I cocked one up I could just restart the room. The timer did keep going here, so I couldn't get too comfortable. When I finished these missions, I was done. The trophy popped. Metal Gear Solid 2's VR missions were over.
Is that it? Is that the VR missions done? Is that the VR missions done? Yeah! Ooh! Look at that! Look at that beautiful trophy! Oh, I fucking did it! Oh my god, look at that! Oh, that was so hard!
I still had the Vita version to do if I really wanted to, but I didn't want to. I considered this the hardest platinum I ever had to do, pretty much just because of these VR missions. This was really, really hard. Just for context, on the screen I'm going to put every platinum I've got. Of course there's some really easy ones on there, and some you could probably just not look at because, yeah, don't look at those. But there were some hard ones up there, in my opinion. So hopefully this can give some perspective on how hard I thought this was. The big question here is whether or not this is harder than the big boss run, because I do think it's worth discussing which is more difficult. The PS3 version asks you to do all the VR missions to get the shiny platinum, and the PS5 version just asks you to become Big Boss. Both of these are lofty challenges that force you to become really good at the game, and overall comparable in difficulty, but let's break down the finer points. I'll start with Big Boss, since that was what I did first. The Big Boss run requires you to play the game at a consistently high level of competency. Because of the 8 save limit, you need to maintain a flawless run in between each of those saves, and a proper cock-up means having to revert back to the previous save and doing it again. This can have an effect on you mentally, since you have to consider potentially having to repeat whole sections of the game if you mess up. The game on Extreme is no joke, and certain parts of this can be really hard. There are lots of handy guides you can follow though, and following these meticulously can make the run a whole lot easier, provided you can do it well. Some of the bosses can even be cheesed with exploits, but other ones you just gotta get good at. In a nutshell, it's hard, but easier with the guide, and some bosses you just gotta get really good at to do, for instance Ray. It also requires you to consistently play well for far longer stretches of time. Let's look at the VR missions in comparison. A lot of these are really easy. Up until around Pliskin, I'd say, you can breeze through them. And even Pliskin I only thought required a bit more effort. It's the MGS1 Snake missions that really drive this up from being a lengthy but painless challenge to the madness I've just described to you. I would say that the hardest of these missions were more difficult than any one section of the Big Boss run. These asked far more of me as a player, doing things the main game never had me doing. I never had to face this many enemies in one go, sneak through areas this dense, or get by with such limited tools. I think the only parts of Big Boss that could really compare in difficulty were the Guard Rush, Strut E-Bomb Disposal, and the Tengu and Ray fights, and even those I don't think I could say were harder than these hardest VR missions. This alone could be the thing that would cement the VR missions as being harder, but I think it's worth pointing out that each of these VR missions tends to only be a few minutes long, and they can be retried over and over again if you fail. Compared to the Big Boss run, which, as I remind you, needed you to play well for much longer stretches of time, being able to compartmentalise these missions into their own little chunks that you can do whenever you want does ease up the tension a bit. You cock up right at the end of the tanker? Good job mate, start the whole thing again, have fun. You cock up on a VR mission? No problem, go have a can of coke, grab a sandwich, and try again. You'll be exactly where you were in about a minute or so. If you ask me, personally, the VR missions are harder. Though the majority of them are quite easy, there's still a lot to get through, and even just the grind itself can wear down on you. You really have to up your game for the MGS1 Snake missions, and try to wrestle with the controls on the VR missions. Both Big Boss and VR are still really fucking hard, and stand above everything else I've done in MGS though. Of course, this is all a matter of perspective, and opinions on difficulty can vary wildly. Whether or not you can trust my judgment is entirely up to you. I mean, my favourite Matrix film is Reloaded. Make of that what you will. Let's wrap this up. Though they were difficult and caused me no end of hassle, I enjoyed MGS2's VR missions. As was the case with MGS1, I think it was a great way of getting me to engage more with the game's mechanics, that I may have completely neglected to do in the main story. These really pushed my skills in all parts of the MGS2 gameplay, such as sniping tricky targets, curving stinger rockets, weaving in and out of hiding spots, and more. I will say though, these didn't make me think as much as the MGS1 missions. MGS1 had more gimmicky VR missions, where I had to try and figure out the intended way of completing them that the game wanted me to, with examples being that one Nikita mission where you got to destroy parts of the level in a specific order, or the one where you got to use footprints to lower a guard all the way across the room so you could walk into a claymore and then blow up a wall just to get to the end. That one was fiddly, but it was still something to figure out. MGS2 doesn't really have missions like that, and the missions seem a lot more skill based and cerebral. You could say that this makes them feel more organic to the actual sort of gameplay you partake in though. It's preference. I'm actually surprised they didn't do more, like, why not have some swimming VR missions? I like the swimming, and not saying I'd actually need more of them, but that's a whole mechanic of MGS2 that got left out here. I do think it's a shame that there aren't any mystery missions here, since they were my favourite back in MGS1. Those are really fun to figure out. The photography missions do include similar puzzle elements to work out, but nothing quite hits the eureka moments like those mystery missions had. If you've never tried these before, I reckon you should have a go. Some of these are actually really fun, and if you enjoy the gameplay of MGS2 and want to test yourself at something that'll push those skills to their limits, then have a crack at it. I imagine most people playing this game are on more modern hardware at this point, and won't have to endure the same pressure sensitivity madness that I had to, and the experience should be a lot smoother. I'm not going to lament the fact that you no longer have to wrestle the controls, because that's an undeniably good thing, but that smug elitist part of me does feel the slightest sense of inescapable superiority that comes with having to deal with something a lot more difficult. In creating the trophy list for the Master Collection version of MGS2, it seems like Konami made a conscious decision to replace the VR mission trophy with the Big Boss one. There is a trophy for getting first place in 50 different ones, so there is an incentive to dip your toes in, but actually getting stuck into the really hard ones is absolutely not a requirement. Did they think that asking players to beat every single VR missions and get the Big Boss rank in one trophy list would be way too much? If you made it this far, then thank you for watching. If you watched most of it but didn't get this far, then I thank you and hope my voice somehow reaches you in your sleep or something. It's been fun going through the harder challenges that Metal Gear has to offer, and my appreciation for the series has definitely grown. This was already my favourite franchise, but it's only now I think I can actually feel qualified to discuss the gameplay in more depth. I'm not touching Survive, and Volume 2 is not out yet. So for the time being, I've done all the Metal Gear I need to do. Not counting just redoing the same stuff again on the platforms. I'll have more Metal Gear videos, though I'm sure I can think of more things to talk about. Thank you for watching, stay solid, and I'll see you next time.